Today I'm going to show you 21 mistakes done by copyists, not scribes who actually can read and write, but copyists themselves who are paid in order to copy these long texts onto these books of the dead. Of course, this has been converted into a book, but normally they're scrolls. For error number 1, which is included in chapter 17, you'll see this mistake quite often, spacing. So when this copyist is copying out the words, he's trying to complete the column and then move on to the next one. But then he realizes he's either forgotten a word somewhere in between, which is very common, or he basically went too tight in the writing and therefore leaving some space, or he's moved over too often to the next column, which he's forgotten to fill over here. So in error number 2, which is also in chapter 17, what you're seeing here is a little space. It's hard to tell, but if you're often reading these texts, you'll see these type of mistakes as well. The omission of a word down here. But really, this scribal word should have gone down here, and then the extension of Ani's name would have continued here. But instead, they continued over here to try to keep it uniform, but therefore creating that space down there. For error number 3, which I would consider a blunder, these books are made for the deceased. Their names are important. They would be included in here. So you can see here how you have by the Osiris, and then you have the name of the scribe, Ani, and then they would be missing a word here, which is true of voice. That should have repeated here, but it didn't. So they've omitted the name of the actual owner or purchaser of this papyrus down here. So for error number 4, we have here a continuation of chapter 18. Here you have the word of the city Letopolis. Now they should have continued adding more words. There might have been something in the spell that's missing, and there's a reason why now you could see how they poorly extended the word to try to kind of fill up the space desperately. You could see how here everything is nicely tight and oriented properly together and fits quite well, but then as they kept going, they realized, we're gonna have a lot of space here, so let's just extend as best as we can. We can't, and they left the space. For the 5th error, we're still in chapter 18, and what you have here is the same situation as before, where they were writing everything quite well and arranged in a proper order and well positioned, but then what happened is they're realizing they're running out of space, and you could see how everything started to stretch out, and then poorly written and very quickly, and you could see even the name of Osiris has been stretched out as best as they could, but they still were left with space. For error number 6, we're still in chapter 18. You could see these massive 2 blunders where they're trying to extend, but they've completely left a massive space, either omitting words or simply too much space for what they were trying to fill. And here is even worse blunder, where they just kept writing out and leaving this massive column of space. They could have added the name of the scribe or owner Ani, but they didn't. So I would say that's quite a bad blunder. For error number 7, we are now in chapter 18, and you can see a small little mistake over here. So what you have is the name of Osiris and the owner Ani, but they did not add the word scribe, which actually appeared quite frequently in this book, but for some reason it was simply forgotten as the copyist kept going. I would say error number 9 is by far the worst blunder you can find here. So as they were filling out this information here and continuing chapter 18, you could see how they kept going and everything was tightly put together in the red. But as they kept going, they're realizing they're running out of space this time, not the opposite. And they kept crushing the words closer and closer and abbreviating certain words without actually filling them out completely. And when they got to the very bottom, they realized they had no space left. So they completely extended right out into the border, which is a poor decision by the copyist to do, but they didn't have a choice. They had to finish the words. So I would say this is by far the worst blunder I've seen in this Book of the Dead. We are now at the 9th error. This is chapter 54. Now, what usually happens is when spells are introduced, they start off with this red color ink. To introduce the spell, you could see it here, here, and there. But here, it's only in black. So this mistake is by the copyists who didn't switch the reeds, so they kept this in black instead of actually writing it out in red like the other 3. For error number 10, which continue on the same page, they did the same thing, leaving a small little space. This is a minor error, but still very unprofessional on their part for the copyist. Error number 11 is quite unusual. We are in chapter 92, and you could see here there is a gap between the words. So I'm not sure what happened here. The sentence makes sense entirely, but why the gap is very unusual. Maybe they were trying to express something else, but ended up having to continue this way, or they may have stopped here with a different idea and then continued from there. It's very difficult to say, but that's another mistake. We are now at error number 12. This is chapter 15. of the Book of the Dead, and a couple of mistakes here you could see. These are actually beautiful hieroglyphs, probably the best of the copyists. But what happened here is each one identifies a different aspect of Osiris, and they just go down like that. But you see here that the sentence is completed, but they had too much room. So once again, they're extending the words, creating gaps and spaces as best as they could. Unfortunately, that didn't execute very well. For the 13th error, I would say it's by far also pretty bad. Here, what happens is, this was not part of the papyrus originally. So Ani and his wife Tutu had to be given their names and titles. But as you see, they started off doing really well and boxed it up. But they needed to add more for Ani and his wife later on. This could have been added much later once he passed away and then she continued. So she probably gave him the titles. And as they kept going in the columns, you could see how the lines are pretty mismatched and not aligned, and creating even a space over there. And you could see Tutu's name is filled out, but very poorly done, where they could have just moved the hieroglyphs a little bit over here, but they were trying to go to the very end, but they did not achieve any success there. So that's an error in itself. Error number 13, we are at chapter 134, and this is pretty apparent now. Once you've noticed the pattern, you can see these monstrous gaps that are created in between. Now, why is this gap there? A very good answer is available. This is where the name of the scribe goes again, which is the Osiris scribe Ani, true of voice. They forgot to put it, which is a very bad thing to do, especially if you want to live forever in the afterlife. Your name needs to be in these spells. So if Ani is giving praise to Re here, which is the spell or the hymn, he can't, his name is not there. He's not recognized, which is pretty bad blunder, I would say, for an Egyptian person who believes in their faith. Error number 14 is pretty apparent now. You could see this little spacing. So as they were writing the hieroglyphs or the hymn or the spells, they added the name of Ani, who is the Osiris scribe Ani, true of voice, before Osiris. They had not ran out of space, but they just had extra space. They could have added other things, but they didn't. But they tried to extend it as best as they could, but still ended up having some space. So for error number 16, you can see the same type of mistake here, where they tried to fill out the name of Osiris, or the Osiris Ani, but they didn't complete it by adding true of voice, which they could have done, but this was neglected by the copyists, creating a tiny space here at the bottom. Error number 15, with chapter 18, you can see the same two type of mistakes. They're filling out the name of the scribe of Ani over here, but they jumped over to the next column to create, or continue the sentence. So they have here a space, and they did the same thing here, adding the name once they finished the spell or the hymn, as they extended as best as they could, but they still were left with space. Error number 16 for chapter 124. Now, this is very uncommon. When you're adding plurality, you're doing, especially in papyrus, you're doing 3 dots. Very rarely do you actually use lines. But here what happened is they were almost completing the hymn or sentence or spell, and then as they kept going, they realized they got to fill the space, so they turned the dots, the 3 dots, into lines, and then they made them vertical instead of properly putting them as horizontal. So they did that in order to extend the space and extend the hieroglyphs to fill the space. So that's an interesting little corrective blunder. Error number 17 for this spell did the same thing. You can see they extended it and added the lines vertically. Instead of adding the 3 lines like that, they did it this way in order to fill the space. Another calculated or corrected error. Error number 18 for chapter 84, the same thing. They were about to write the Osiris Ani, or the owner, and they just simply left the space and forgot to put it, which is a blunder, really. Error number 19 for chapter 155, more spaces that were created and did not fully have enough words to put in there. Error number 20 for chapter 166, you can see the same thing. They left the space out here after the name of Osiris, probably forgetting some words. Error number 20b for chapter 151, you can see here they forgot to complete the name of the Osiris scribe Ani. They just had the Osiris and could not fill up the space. It was too small, so they left it blank. And the final 21st error for chapter 185, which is the hymn of Osiris. Here, Ani's name was added and a room was left for his wife Tutu when she passed away, but they forgot to add her name, so she is excluded from this chapter. And those are the complete apparent errors that you can find in the Book of the Dead of Ani. I hope you liked the video. Please like and share with your friends.